Welcome. My name is Kalinka Timmer. I work at the University of Warsaw in Poland, and I work on bilingualism and how the context influences the context we are in. And today we will be talking with distinguished Professor Janet van Hell, who is an expert on language development, as well as second language learning, and in general, bilingual usage of two languages. So she's the director of the Center of Language Sciences at Penn State University. And in this video, we will be talking specifically about foreign accented speech and how we are perceiving this. Welcome. So let me jump in with a very general question. So when we are listening to someone speaking, do we form expectations just by hearing their voice? So, for example, the voices of females and of males are different. Does this cause that we start to make expectations about who they are?
Yeah, we do. So when we're listening to other people, clearly there's a sound that reaches our ears. But we actually use all information that we have available in order to understand what the person's saying. So we look at the facial information, all kinds of features. We use our prior knowledge about this very specific category of speakers. So even though the speech signal enters our ears, we actually use much more information in order to understand what a person is saying. And that other information actually influences what we hear. So when we see a female face, we expect, because we know how females tend to sound, we make expectations about the pitch. So one of the aspects of a speech signal. And when we see a male face, we also make expectations about their voice. And when there's a female with a very low voice, at first, we're a little bit surprised because what we see and what we hear does not match. And that's also where foreign accented speech comes in.
That's wonderful. So that means that indeed we wanted to move to foreign accented speech because through globalization, nowadays we do not only come into contact with native speakers, but we also hear people that learned a language later in life speak a second language. So do we listen to them differently when people have a second language? Like, is it more difficult to listen to them? Do we pay more attention?
Well, at first we do. So when we're first confronted with a particular foreign accented speech that we're not familiar with, then it takes a little bit more work in our brains to understand that person. But work in my lab and from many other labs around the world has found that we adjust ourselves really fast to that particular variety of speech. So our auditory system, so the whole system, brain, all kinds of other systems that are involved in understanding speech, we adapt remarkably fast to foreign accented speech. So research has found that within 1 minute, our speech perception categories that have been trained on listening to native accented speech can adapt within 1 minute to foreign accented speech. And then the outcome is that we're equally as well able to understand foreign accented speech as we're able to understand native accented speech. So there's a very brief period of time that our system has to adapt to this specific variety of a language, but we're remarkably fast in adapting. And then basically our comprehension is just as it is to native accented speech.
So then it's just as easy to understand native and foreign accented speech.
Yeah, as long as the speech is intelligible. So, but that's true for any speech. If you have a native speaker who is basically unintelligible, then of course we can't make any sense of what the person is saying.
Yes. And would that work the same with dialectal speech?
Yeah. So, we always think that there's the sort of typical language that people are speaking, but there's no such thing. So even if you go to a particular country, you have lots of dialectal variations, or people who stutter, people who have all kinds of different ways of speaking. And our brains are already pretty much trained to comprehending these different dialectal varieties, or, you know, a person who's stuttering, or a person who has a pipe in their mouth, or a person who has all kinds of speech varieties, including dialectal speech. And we have no problem understanding them. And, you know, foreign extended speech is in the very same area. So we adapt to foreign extended speech as well, very fast.
So it's wonderful to hear that we really fastly adapt and that we can understand everything. But how about not just listening to what they're saying, but do we also form stereotypes about people when hearing their voice, or when hearing them speaking with an accent, whether it's foreign or a dialect?
Yeah, we definitely. So that's the prior information that we're using.
Yeah.
So, you know, we categorize the world around us, and speech is no exception. So work in my lab and that of others has shown, for example, that if you present listeners with a particular sentence in, you know, let's say American English, and this very same sentence is preceded by a face that has Asian features, then people actually hear more of an accent than when that very same sentence is preceded by a white American face. The sentence is identical, but you hear more of an accent.
So that means we integrate what you're hearing together with the face that we're seeing.
Yeah, so your eyes are actually tricking your ears. So the speech signal is the same, but because your eyes are expecting a foreign accent to come out of a face with Asian features, our ears actually hear more of an accent in that particular case. So we use our entire system to comprehend language, and sometimes that leads to stereotypes. And, you know, we know there are many situations, for example, in the legal system, when people have, you know, that's where social justice comes in. When people have an accent, they are confronted with particular stereotypes. And that is because, you know, we always categorize people around us on the basis of prior knowledge.
Yes.
So sometimes, and that leads to social injustice in particular situations.
And so you were so I can imagine that in multiple situations this can lead to social injustice, but with the listening to speech, you say that people adapt like really quickly and we can understand. So is it also possible that while we have these stereotype feeling or expectations at the beginning and we draw these conclusions, that when we get to know someone over time, we change our opinion?
Yeah, and that's one of the things that my lab is also trying to achieve. So we try to, you know, to learn more about intricacies of how social and lexical information, so that's how we call it, all the information about all the prior knowledge that you have about the speaker that influences what you actually listen. So we try to examine that both at the behavioral level and at the neural level. But we also do quite a bit of outreach to, you know, to just inform the broader community that we adapt ourselves pretty fast to foreign extended speech, to any a variety of speech for that matter. And, you know, we have to, and we are using pre-categorized information to help us understand, but which helps us to understand speech, but sometimes it has a negative impact when our stereotypes take over.
So it's really promising to hear that science is actually helping to show us that we are adapting and that it's possible to avoid these stereotypes or to get over it. So are there also some specific suggestions that people could take into account themselves to overcome these stereotypes?
Well, I think it's important to start by acknowledging that there's no such thing as standard speech. So if we throw that out of the window and we open ourselves up to the idea that, you know, there's no standard language, everyone brings their own history, their own way of speaking to the language. combined with the fact that as a listener, you can quickly adapt to many varieties of language, I think that would already be a very good start. So throw the idea of a standard language out of the window, accept the fact that we as humans, you are uniquely equipped with adapting to foreign extended speech. And I think that would be a good place to start.
Yeah, that sounds like a wonderful base to start indeed. And especially for teachers, I would say, who will have students in their classroom that might have immigrated at one point or might have other languages at home and speak with an accent.
Yeah, so I think teachers in particular have a very important, well, I don't have to say how teachers should behave because they know that themselves, but you know, they are a very important role models. So their behavior is taken over by their students. So if teachers have a very open-minded attitude towards different varieties of languages, and don't assume that there's the way to speak, that there's the perfect way to speak a language, that models that behavior to children, because children can be pretty, and again, I don't have to tell teachers that, but they easily lead themselves on the basis of stereotypes, right? The moment a child looks differently, sounds differently, perhaps smells differently, they categorize that child in a particular class. And it's up to the teachers to sort of model better behavior. So, and you know, even just telling the children that our brains are uniquely adapted to adapt to, or uniquely built for adapting to foreign extended speech, that would already be a great start.
That is a wonderful conclusion. So thank you so much for telling us that we hear foreign accented speech, but that we adapt to it really quickly, and that actually there is no one standard of speaking, but there's just a lot of variety, and probably even within the same speaker, we can find this variety. Yeah. And that while we make conclusions based on prior information that we have, that we do adapt when getting to know people and see people for who they are. Thank you very much.
Thank you.